Basically, everybody, when it comes to the Cleveland Browns, the thoughts are the same right now. For rookie quarterbacks, and probably even more, the bigger thought is when are we actually going to see the rookie quarterbacks? I'm going to try to break it down. Browns, 3D starts Monday. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. You're doing the eliminating things. 3D on the ODR streaming. We appreciate all of you, who come on every day for your content here from the OBR, whether it is the written content from a fabulous group of writers, or the OBR streaming network starting every night at 6 p.m. with Browns 3D. Several shows throughout the week after Browns 3D at 6 o'clock, so make sure you stick around for that. Jacob Roche and Penix will be debuting film work this evening, and I believe it's going to be Mason Graham is going to be the topic. So pretty sure you guys might want to stick around later for that this evening. We've last spoke with you guys Friday, so a ton of Cleveland Browns news since then, but some Browns news, certainly NFL news. Official today. Deontay Johnson, the one-year deal is official. He agreed to terms on it last week. So it'll be interesting. When those were kind of doubting it, a lot of it I think has to do with Deontay Johnson, just where his net is at. Um, Last year he did actually have a 8 for 122 game with the Carolina Panthers. Again, this is what I try to say, as a two move. Could be here for 2 minutes, 2 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years. It's all going to come out to Deontay Johnson, conducts himself. An unfortunate side here. Browns linebacker Devin Bush was taken into custody and arrested yesterday in Pennsylvania. An issue at home with his girlfriend. Not sure where that stands now. This is pretty much the latest we have to this point, so certainly something to monitor. And something that the Browns just don't really need right now, but just trying to do everything they can to try to clean up the image here. Soldier soul on player in Deshaun Watson, and it did not pay one dividend whatsoever. And sometimes people forgive if something works out, but when it doesn't, it's only makes them question, why exactly you entertained the move to begin with. So we'll stick around for the latest news in regards to Devin Bush and his arrest yesterday in Pennsylvania. One other thing of note from the NFL, we know the 2026 NFL draft next year will be in Pittsburgh. It has now been announced that the 2027 NFL draft will be in Washington, D.C. If you guys want to start calling the March Manning Jeremiah Smith draft, go right ahead and do that. Speaking of the draft, and of course, most recently, the Cleveland Browns selections in the 2025 NFL draft. I think everybody's trying to figure out exactly how this quarterback thing is going to work out. And I'm not saying that, there's any plan in place yet. And, I'm not guaranteeing anything to anybody. If I speak on it, it's probably what I think will happen, or maybe the way that I would handle it myself. But I think we cannot rule out certainly Shedeur Sanders and Dillon Gabriel being in this quarterback room. I know normally you would think of, a quarterback that was drafted late in the third round and with number 94 overall, which actually turns out for anybody who wanted to look into the math, it was basically a Murray Cooper for Dillon Gabriel. It was essentially how that trade worked out, with Cooper going to the Buffalo Bills. And then the selection at 144, of course, of Shedeur Sanders. Neither of them are young, and I don't mean that as a knock. It's not like they're 21 years old. It's not like, they just, were in bad situations and decided to declare, which really probably isn't going to happen anymore with the way college football works and certainly the way the portal works. So both of them have extensive resumes, of course, of their time playing, in college. Gabriel certainly a little bit more time than Shedeur. But 23 years old, 24 years old for both of these guys, Sanders 23, Gabriel 24. You know, and it's an interesting situation for both Sanders and Gabriel because drafted where they were, and if it were other teams that they had ended up going to, and again, this is basically speaking on where they were drafted, they wouldn't necessarily be very close to an opportunity or maybe even have a chance at even getting an opportunity. The Browns quarterback position uniquely bad, I guess is just the way to describe it because it's unique that you had nobody and basically ripped the room apart and basically started it all over, but that doesn't mean it's good, right? So they certainly, that's going to work out, for Shedeur and for Dillon. And you got to keep in mind that Kenny is here. You have to keep in mind that Joe Flacco is here. I think a lot of people, and for me again, I just don't get the way you're equating that. Well, Kenny Pickett was the first move they made, so therefore, I gotta be. I just don't see that that's anything that's going to help Kenny Pickett. And I'm not trying to rain on Kenny Pickett's parade here by any means whatsoever, of course. But I just don't see, the fact that he was the first one acquired, how that's going to give him a leap in the pecking order. Um, you know, I liked the move at the time. I was one of the few, I was kind of a silent crowd that actually kind of liked Kenny Pickett coming out of Pitt. His last year there was obviously very, very accomplished. And just Bruce started out pretty well for Pittsburgh. I mean, I think everybody just had to get over the weirdly jointed thumb thing that made it seem like his hands were so small and whatever that was about. And, I'm sure Brad Ward can give you a full dynamic on the, Kenny Pickett hand size issues. And then kind of fell apart quickly. And then, of course, the end of 2023, Kenny Pickett was actually healthy, and Pittsburgh opted to not start him in a playoff game. So sometimes, the organization of a player will basically tell you everything about the player without actually coming out and saying about the player. But you have to think for Pittsburgh, starting Rudolph in a playoff game over, a guy who was in his second year, had just been a first round pick, and Kenny Pickett. I think that kind of tells you maybe, certainly how Pittsburgh felt. Kenny comes in here and obviously a fresh situation for him. And it's actually, I think, tougher position now for Kenny Pickett because I think once Joe came out, and obviously the Joe history that Joe has here, and now with the two rookies, and Dylan Gabriel is obviously a very, very likable guy, and I think everybody's going to start to see that here when he does get to town. And I think this fan base is absolutely ready to fall in love with Shedeur Sanders. I truly, truly believe that. So Kenny Pickett came in here, and this is a guy that Browns fans probably normally would have really liked, would have normally really appreciated. Hey, didn't work out for him. Give him another opportunity. Browns fans would have loved to back Kenny Pickett for him to be a successful quarterback here for the Browns and maybe up the what of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Y'all never thought you'd love Joe Flacco, but y'all certainly ended up loving Joe Flacco, right? Um, Kenny's, and even Deontay Johnson, there's a relationship there. I'm not saying that either move was made with the intention of the other bringing in, but you kind of look at that. And I think now that maybe Kenny's just probably not going to have the opportunity that I think he thought he might actually have when he first got to town and was one of the first moves the Cleveland Browns officially made in the 2025 offseason. Again, good kid, Jersey kid. I know people who have worked with Kenny Pickett in the development of Kenny Pickett to get him where he is today. I'm not saying, I believe it when they say it's an open competition, but even if it's an open competition, it always seems there's favorites, right? And you can weigh odds and lay odds. And just think for now, I think Kenny Pickett, unfortunately, is probably going to be in the toughest situation here. Um, and it's the business, unfortunately. It's not like Kenny Pickett can't spend 10 years in the league, and there is certainly other organizations that would look to bring in Kenny Pickett. Maybe not have this close of a chance to actually smell the starting job again. But Kenny Pickett, There's no reason Kenny Pickett shouldn't win another 6, 7 years in this league if he proves to be a viable backup quarterback. A good influence within meeting rooms, a good influence within film work, all of that type of stuff. Um, and of course, it's Joe, and there's a million reasons that you think, for me, that Joe is your week one starter. I've gotten into this multiple times. There's not any NFL team that doesn't take the field in week one, saying we're going to do everything we can to win tonight. And you know what? If we're going to come out, we're trying to do it again next week. And, you believe you're in the season until you have proven to yourself that essentially you're going to be in the season. So don't listen to anything otherwise. Every NFL team goes in a week one thinking they have an opportunity. Does it pay out? That's another story to tell, of course. Um, who, was able to, no limitations. Nothing looked, like, Joe's done last year. I mean, look, he's always been a little reckless with the football. We all know that. Browns fans know that. You've watched this guy for years. But as far as still being the big, tall, solid thrower of the ball, he was there last year for Joe. It's on tape, and that's what led to the weird situation that he was in with the Colts, of course. Until the Colts just said, this year that, they don't think they have enough faith in Anthony Richardson so much to the point that, they gave Daniel Jones $13, $14 million, whatever the number was. But Joe was getting it done last year. Certainly, Joe, it's a little bit different now than it was. Joe's top guy in 2023 was Amari Cooper, who obviously no longer with the organization. One of his other top guys in 2023 was Elijah Moore, who is no longer with the organization. And in fact, actually, he's going to go maybe fill some of the footsteps of Amari Cooper in Buffalo last year. The last one was certainly David Njoku. David's still here. David and Joe had a great relationship on the field together, very successful with each other. So certainly that was something that you saw grow and you get to watch and monitor in 2023. The offense certainly going to be probably a little bit different. I'm sure there's going to be some sort of Tommy Reese, influence. Probably going to look to run the ball more accustomed to what we saw, pre-2023 when Joe took over, right? Because the running game was kind of working. Jerome Ford wasn't doing a bad job, but he brought in Joe. He was fresh. The arm was vibrant. So you would just kind of let the old guy just toss the pill every week, every. And he was getting it done. But now, certainly, with the two running back selections in Judkins and Sampson, they've told us all from the time they basically shut this team in the 2024 season that they were going to go back to the offense. They felt they were more comfortable being the offense from 23, 22, 21, etc. The offensive line, kind of feels like this is maybe getting like the last ride to it. You know, Joel made the decision during the offseason to come back for Ethan Posick, end of contract. Joel Batonio, end of contract. Ryan Teller, end of contract. Jack Conklin, end of contract. Follow me if you're not paying attention, right? So, for these guys, and, for the most part, all of them remember, one been in the league for a long time. Really good Posick, Batonio has had big injuries. Teller has had ding injuries. Kumsik has had ding injuries. Conklin is the one that we all certainly had, some really, really rough medical spots injuries during his time within the league. But you think you're going to win a little bit more, which should open up play action, which should open up hopefully a deep passing game. All things that should favor the big arm of Joe Flacco. And then you get to the point of, there's certainly questions you can ask of this, about this. What is the legitimacy of Joe Flacco playing 17 games, not just health? Joe turns the ball over a lot. So, it's a fact. Joe Flacco turns the football over a lot. When do you get to a point where maybe it's just too much? He's just turning the ball over too much. We just can't have this. So, yet another question to be, answered. So that for me gets to, when exactly would be the window of opportunity to start working the kids in? The kids will be here this weekend. Gabriel, Shedeur, Sanders. Browns will be releasing rookie numbers soon. The one we love of this point is Mason Graham will wear number 4. Number 1 is available. Judkins wore number 1 last year. You kind of think maybe that syncs up. Number 2 is available. Shedeur Sanders wore number 2. You kind of think that syncs up. 3 not available. 4 not available. 5 is available. So that's an interesting one there, but you're gonna need a jersey for Kenny Pickett. 6 unavailable for JOK, 7 unavailable for your kicker. 8 is available, and that again is gonna be another interesting one. Kenny Pickett, number 8, all of his life. I think he wore 7 last year, but he's been 8 number all of his life. Dillon Gabriel, been number 8 all of his life. So things are just gonna watch and see the way comes out. So that would mean what would be the jersey number for Carson Messenger? What would be the jersey number for Fannin? Times 0, 80, it could be 88. Dillon Sampson, of course, would be the last one too. What number would he wear? Was a single digit number wearer at Tennessee. But it doesn't look like that will be a number available necessarily from him in the single digits to wear here in Cleveland, at least for this season. But you're going to get the rookies in right and to get them worked up as quickly as you possibly can, and get them going because it's not just rookie camp. After that, it's going to be OTAs, and you're going to start this 4-man competition. So you guys need to do a lot, and that could be one of the things that's going to confuse just how the quarterback position is going for the Browns, whether it's OTAs, whether it's mini camps, of course, whether it's training camp. I don't think you're going to put a guy at 40 and a half years old in, obviously preseason games. Just don't think, you're going to ask that of Joe, Flacco, of course. So, what does it work then? I mean, for me, if I think Kenny Pickett is kind of already the odd man out, you know, to the Browns, give him work for the sake of getting him work. At times, I'm sure you're going to want to rest, everybody a little bit. But do you give Kenny some rest for the sake of getting some rest? Or do you get Kenny a good workload? Because hopefully, you want to be able to flip him for something, right? You want to be able to flip Kenny Pickett, hopefully, Pickett for a pick, Pickett for a pick. And I believe it's something certainly that the Browns would consider. We know that Cleveland loves their late summer trades to accumulate more assets. The Browns currently sit with 9 draft picks in 2026. And then of course it comes down to the kids. How does it work as far between Gabriel and Sanders as far as is there a pecking order already? Just because Gabriel was drafted at 94 and Shedeur went 50 picks later, is that basically for us to see as being put in Sharpie that it's Dillon first, then Shedeur. Again, we don't know the answers to this, of course. It'll be nice to get them out there and get them started. I'm sure both guys are probably chopping at the bit, of course, at this point. When Shedeur is out there working every day, already ingratiating himself into the Cleveland area. We'll see for Gabriel, when he gets here to town, it'll be another similar thing there. And this is going to be, it's going to be interesting because it's going to be modeled very, very highly. You think it gets a little nuts every now and then, as far as, quarterback work, quarterback statistics from, OTAs, mini camps, etc. You think it gets off the rails there? Imagine when there's 2 of them here and there's 2 rookies here. That's when it's going to get really nuts for this. What I'm saying? It's going to get cuckoo. It's going to get crazy. Certainly, for the fan base and certainly the coverage that is going to come from it. things get heavily covered here for the Cleveland Browns media as it is. Maybe not always the correct one, but it gets covered nonetheless, right? Um, with all that being said, then you try to figure out how this is all going on. Um, we'll get to the summer, and again, is this something where if you play 3 preseason games, Kenny getting started in one, is Shedeur getting the start in another, is Dillon Gabriel getting the start in another? Like I said, I don't think you're going to have Flacco play preseason games. I just don't know if it's necessarily going to work. I don't know if it would make much sense to me. It certainly would be a waste, in my opinion, to have Joe at his age with his vast experience to play in a preseason game. Then you get into the regular season. And again, like I said, if you're winning, contending, it does become very difficult to upset the apple cart, so to speak. I'm saying we want to see these kids because we got major decisions to make here in April of 2026 with moving to first round selections. Does it go a half the season and you say that's it? Regardless, I want to get these kids at least, or one of these kids, X amount of starts. Do I want to get both of these kids some starts? These are fascinating questions that, if you could get, Kevin Stefanski down at a table and give you an hour of his time, you'd love for him to try to, verbalize his thought process, his thought plan, on just how all this will work for the quarterback position going further this season. I think with what I just said, it's kind of the way I think it works. I think either way, those probably got 6 to 8 starts. Unless you're something crazy like 6-2 or 7-1. If you're just kind of like treading water, I think it's 6 to 8 starts. So if it's 6 to 8 starts, you're talking another 11 games, you're talking possibly another 9 games. And whether it might not be the right thought process, the right procedure to be starting a quarterback that was drafted at number 94 overall, or a quarterback that was drafted at 144 overall. The Browns would like to have some idea of these guys before they get into the major decision that will most likely be there regardless in 2026 of which quarterback they are going to draft with one of those 2 first-round picks. So if that's the case, and ideally you say, hey, hopefully one of these guys at least turns out to be a great number 2, they both got to play. They both play. There's nothing, in Dillon Gabriel. There's nothing in Shedeur Sanders. Them mimicking the opposing team's quarterback and scout. He was going to say, you know what? We're good. We're good. This is my guy. Next 5 years, and put my name, my job on it. No, So I think, the plan would then just be to, again, have another big, really invested quarterback room again in 2026. I don't know if it's maybe but all the draft capital, certainly the 94 pick, the 144 is something that could probably turn out to be, like a top 1, 2, 3, or 4 pick, maybe a top 12 pick, whichever pick is there in 2026, whether it's the Browns pick or it's the Jaguars pick. That pick will most likely end up probably becoming, finally, hopefully, the quarterback of the future for the Browns. A quarterback that will take them to Brook. But that does not mean Dillon Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders are not going to go down on the fight. Both guys, multiple programs, Shedeur and his dad, they built up Jackson State, got the opportunity to take the axe to Colorado. Certainly, took a Colorado football program that for all intents and purposes was on life support. And certainly brought some juice back to it. And with that, more players all of a sudden were now willing to say, I will go play for Coach Deion Sanders at Colorado. Gabriel, whether it was UCF, whether it was Oklahoma, whether it was Oregon. It's not like Gabriel is not, well versed in, finding himself in, you know, getting new spots, new opportunities. Certainly, it's happened every couple of games really for Dillon Gabriel. So, not, no sweat of these. And then the thing is certainly going to be, and for me, this is going to be one of the more interesting ones, is, what exactly will be the relationship between Shedeur and Dillon Gabriel? The two of them. You know, A, they could find a way to help each other, but B, the two of them are trying to get this long-term Cleveland Browns starting quarterback gig for themselves, understanding that it's the way it's going to work this year is you're competing against a known face, whether it's Joe Flacco, whether it's Kenny Pickett. But once these guys actually get into the field in whatever capacity they do in 2025, they're basically also competing against, an unknown face to them. Whether it's a Lenore Sanders, whether it could be a Drew Dillon, you know, these quarterbacks, that appear to be headed for the 2026 draft and appear to, be guys that would, change the way round one of 2026, would go compared to, only one quarterback going or two quarterbacks, one late in Jacksonville in 2025. So not only are they competing against each other, for right now, there's a certain competition versus Joe Flacco and Kenny Pickett. I think they're both going to just get their opportunities this year, regardless. Does one of these guys get the first crack at the starting gig in 2025? Hopefully, won't. And the Browns say, well, I can't pull him. I'm going to let the kid keep playing. So, I mean, there's going to be a legit, real competition. And it's kind of weird when you're talking about guys who are going to come in as number 3 and number 4 on the depth chart. Everybody would say, well, what is that? Whoever loses is fine. Well, neither are going to be gone. You can't cut either of them because you're not going to get them back to the practice squad. Neither one of them will clear waivers. It's just not going to happen. So it's a huge thing, for Gabriel and Sanders, just being teammates because, the competition between the two of them for what would you say the opportunity was to maybe even hold off the jump as opposed to a guy you're going to draft really high in 2026. 20%, 25%, maybe feels high, right? So, for Shedeur Sanders and Dillon Gabriel, this is just, again, this is an opportunity that neither of them most likely were going to being drafted where they were. But because of their age, their experience, certainly their production, they will get an opportunity. And most likely are going to get that opportunity early here in 2025. And again, they're going to be battling against each other. They're going to be battling against a mystery guy as far as, where and how the 2026 room will shake out in Cleveland. So it's a scene, man. There's a lot going on with the Cleveland Browns right now. You guys enjoyed talking about it. We enjoy everybody coming on out to the OBR every day to read the random musings or find up the OBR streaming network to get our thoughts on all of this. They're to pick up a little more pace certainly this weekend. As the rookies are here in town. We're getting first sights certainly on these guys in Browns gear. Graham, Judd, Schlesinger, Dillon, Gabriel, Sampson, and of course, Mr. Sanders. It's going to be hopefully the beginning of a new time for the Cleveland Browns. And, hopefully, these guys become pillars as far as this team finally finding some sustainable success. Yeah, Jeff Lloyd, we appreciate everybody for coming out and reviewing the OBR. Again, it's written work, whether it's coming out student every day at 6 o'clock on the OBR Streaming Network with me, hosting Browns 3D. Stick around, shows at 7, shows at 8. Really looking to just give you guys the continued thirst, quench through your thirst from Cleveland Browns football. Browns 3D on the OBR. Make sure you subscribed to the OBR on YouTube. Make sure you subscribed to the OBR over on Twitch. This has been your daily delivery of all things done blind. And we'll talk to you later.